Admiral Zethkar stood in front of the huge star map that filled the entire wall of his command room. The lights showed thousands of star systems, all marked in blue to show they belonged to the Dominion Empire. His scaled fingers moved across the display, touching each conquered world with pride. For 300 years, his people had taken over planet after planet, system after system, until almost the entire galaxy bowed to their rule. Only one small area remained free from Dominion control. A cluster of maybe 20 star systems on the outer edge of the galaxy. The old records called this place the human sphere, but Zethkar had his doubts about what lived there. The reports were strange and made little sense. Some said the humans were fierce warriors who never gave up. Others claimed they had technology that could not be explained. Most of the stories sounded like fairy tales told by defeated enemies. Commander Valethus walked into the room carrying a datapad. His expression showed worry, which annoyed Zethkar. The commander was young and believed too many old stories. He stopped in front of the Admiral and gave a proper salute. "Sir, the research team has finished studying the old records about the human sphere," Valethus said. "They want to speak with you before we begin the invasion." Zethkar made a clicking sound with his mouthparts. This was how his species showed they were not impressed. What could those old fools possibly tell me that would matter? We have conquered every species in this galaxy. What makes these humans so special? The records are very old, but they mention things that worry the research team, Valethus explained. They talk about battles where human ships appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as fast. They describe weapons that seem to break the laws of physics. Some reports even claim that humans could predict enemy movements before they happened. The Admiral turned away from the star map and looked at his aide with amusement. "Commander, do you really believe in ghost stories? These humans, if they ever existed at all, are just another primitive species hiding in the dark corners of space. They have probably never even left their home system." But Valethus looked down at his datapad and read more. "Sir, there is something else. The records show that every species that ever fought humans described them the same way. They said humans never surrendered, even when they were completely defeated. They fought until the very last person was dead, and sometimes they won battles they had no right to win." Zethkar walked to the large window that showed the stars outside. His flagship, the Inevitable Victory, was the most powerful ship ever built by the Dominion. Around it, hundreds of other warships waited for his orders. This fleet could destroy entire worlds if needed. The idea that some unknown species could stand against such power was ridiculous. "Valethus, you worry too much," the Admiral said. "Even if these humans exist, they are just one species hiding in a small corner of space. We have the combined might of 50 conquered worlds at our command. We have weapons that can crack planets in half and shields that can stop anything. What could possibly threaten us?" The door to the command room opened again, and Chief Archaeologist Nixara entered. She was from one of the first species the Dominion had conquered, and she wore the metal device on her head that made sure she stayed loyal. But even with the control implant, she seemed nervous as she approached the Admiral. "Sir, I must speak with you about the human sphere," she said in a quiet voice. "The records we have found are not just stories. They contain detailed information about human military tactics, ship designs, and battle outcomes. These are real historical documents, not myths." Zethkar turned to face her with his full attention now. "Show me what you have found." Nixara activated a holographic display that showed images of strange ships and weapon readings. These are from a battle that happened over 400 years ago. A Dominion scouting fleet encountered human vessels near the edge of their territory. The humans were outnumbered 10 to 1, but they still won the fight. The images showed sleek ships that looked different from anything in the Dominion fleet. Their hulls seemed to change color and shape as they moved. Energy readings showed weapons that put out impossible amounts of power for ships of their size. "How do we know these records are real?" Zethkar asked. "Because we found the same information on 12 different worlds, all conquered at different times," Nixara replied. The details match perfectly, even though these species had no contact with each other when they recorded the events. Vaelthus stepped forward and added, "Sir, there is one more thing. Every record mentions the same phrase. Survivors from different battles, from different species, all said they heard human voices saying the same words during combat." "What words?" the Admiral demanded. "For humanity and freedom," Vaelthus said. "They heard it broadcast on all frequencies, during every engagement." Zethkar looked at the data for a long moment. The evidence was strange, but it did not change the facts. His fleet was the largest ever assembled. His ships carried weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Even if humans were real, and even if they were as dangerous as the records claimed, they were still just one species against the might of the entire Dominion Empire. "Prepare the invasion fleet," he ordered. "Tomorrow we enter the human sphere and end this mystery once and for all. If humans really exist, they will learn what happens to those who defy the Dominion. If they are just legends, then we will claim their worlds and add them to our empire." As his officers left to carry out his orders, Zethkar remained by the window looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, in that small cluster of systems, something waited for them. Maybe it was just empty worlds and old ruins. Maybe it was a primitive species that would surrender at the first sight of his fleet. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, the legends were true. And if they were, then tomorrow would be a very different day than he expected. The ship drifted silently through the asteroid field, hidden among the floating rocks and ice chunks that filled this part of space. To any passing scanner, it would look like just another piece of debris from some ancient collision. But the UES Defiance was very much alive, and her crew had been waiting for this moment for over 200 years. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the long-range sensors. His uniform was simple and practical, without the fancy decorations that other species seemed to love. The ship around him looked old and worn, with patches on the walls and equipment that had been repaired many times. This was exactly how they wanted it to look. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at the sensor station, her fingers dancing over the controls. She had been born on this ship, like many of the crew. Her parents had served here before her, and their parents before them. For 8 generations, human families had lived and worked in the hidden fleet, keeping the secret that would save their species. "Contact on long-range sensors," Amy announced. 12 ships, Dominion design, heading toward the Kepler system. Jake nodded. This was what they had been expecting. The Dominion scouts were finally coming to investigate the human sphere. After centuries of careful planning, the moment of truth had arrived. "Send the signal to all hidden bases," Jake ordered. "Tell them the long game has begun." Lieutenant Chris Barnes at the communications station pressed a series of buttons, and invisible signals raced through space. On hidden bases carved inside dead asteroids, on secret facilities built under the ice of frozen moons, and aboard hundreds of ships that had been drifting dark and cold for decades, humans began to wake up. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared as a shimmering blue image next to Jake's command chair. She was actually 3 star systems away, working in a laboratory that the Dominion would never find. For 40 years, she had studied every piece of alien technology that human agents could steal or salvage. She knew more about Dominion ships and weapons than most Dominion engineers. "The scout ships are exactly what we predicted," Elena said, as she looked at the sensor data. "Standard formation, standard equipment, standard procedures. They have no idea what they are really looking for." Jake smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "Good, Ryan, are you ready?" In another part of space, Colonel Ryan Mitchell sat in a small command center that looked like it had been built by people who barely understood space travel. The walls were painted to look old and dirty. The equipment was designed to seem primitive and weak. Even Ryan himself wore simple civilian clothes instead of a military uniform. "Ready as I'll ever be," Ryan replied through the communication. "Link, I've been practicing this role for 20 years. Time to see if I can fool them." The Dominion scouts approached the edge of human space and immediately detected what they expected to find: A small group of space stations orbited a blue and green planet. The stations looked like they had been built by people who were just learning how to work in space. Their hulls were rough and uneven, their weapons were simple energy cannons, and their shields flickered like they might fail at any moment. A communication signal came from the largest station. The image showed a middle-aged human man with graying hair and worried eyes. He wore the kind of simple uniform that minor government officials might use. "Unknown vessels. This is Director Kevin Walsh of the Terran Colonial Authority," the man said. His voice shook slightly as if he was nervous. "About talking to strangers? We welcome you to our system. We are a peaceful people and hope we can establish friendly relations." On his flagship, Admiral Zethkar received the transmission and felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. These humans looked exactly like a dozen other species the Dominion had conquered over the years. They were clearly afraid and trying to seem harmless. There would be no great battle here, no chance for glory. Just another easy conquest to add to his record. Another primitive species, he told his staff officers. They probably developed space travel only a few decades ago. Deploy the standard first contact protocol. But the man calling himself Director Walsh was actually Colonel Ryan Mitchell, one of humanity's best intelligence officers. The nervous expression on his face was carefully practiced. The shaking in his voice was controlled and deliberate. Even the simple uniform he wore had been designed to make him look weak and unimportant. Behind him, the space stations that looked so primitive were actually broadcasting false sensor readings. Hidden inside their crude-looking hulls were defensive weapons that had taken centuries to develop. The energy signatures they gave off were carefully created to hide their true capabilities. "We are representatives of the Dominion Empire," the alien admiral announced. "Your system has been selected for incorporation into our territory. You will surrender all military assets and submit to our authority. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance will be eliminated." Ryan let his face show exactly the right amount of fear and confusion. "Surrender? But we haven't done anything wrong. Surely there must be some mistake. We're just a small colony trying to make a living out here." "There is no mistake," the admiral replied. "You have 24 hours to prepare for the arrival of our main fleet. Any attempt to flee or fight will result in the destruction of your entire population." 24 hours, Ryan repeated, his voice now showing panic. "That's not enough time to contact our government on Earth. Please, we need more time to organize." A proper surrender, the Admiral's expression showed amusement. These humans were even weaker than he had thought. They were already talking about surrender before the real fleet had even arrived. "Very well," he said. "You have 48 hours. Use them wisely." As soon as the transmission ended, Ryan's expression changed completely. The fear and confusion disappeared, replaced by the cold focus of a professional soldier. He opened a secure communication channel to the hidden fleet. "Phase 1 complete," he reported. "They took the bait exactly as predicted. The Admiral is arrogant enough to give us extra time, and he's confident enough to bring his main fleet into our trap." Throughout human space, the message spread to every hidden base and every secret ship. After 2 centuries of careful preparation, of hiding, and planning and waiting, the moment had finally come. The Dominion thought they were conquering a primitive species that had stumbled into space travel by accident. They were about to learn that humanity had been waiting for them all along. On the bridge of the Defiance, Jake Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the positions of his hidden fleet. 50 ships that looked like simple cargo vessels and patrol boats. But appearances, as the Dominion was about to discover, could be very deceiving. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "Begin. Phase 2 preparations. In 48 hours, we show them what humans really are." The Dominion invasion fleet appeared at the edge of the Sol system exactly when Admiral Zethkar had promised. 300 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the blue and silver colors of the Empire. At the center of the fleet, the massive dreadnought Inevitable Conquest led the way toward Earth, its weapons charged and ready for battle. Zethkar stood on his command bridge, feeling confident and pleased with himself. The human system lay before him like a ripe fruit waiting to be picked. His scouts had reported exactly what he expected: a handful of primitive ships defending a single planet, their technology centuries behind Dominion standards. "Enemy fleet detected," his tactical officer announced. 50 vessels in defensive formation around the third planet. Their weapons are powering up, but energy readings are minimal. Through the main viewing screen, Zethkar could see the human fleet waiting for them. The ships looked exactly like the reports had described: simple designs with basic armor and outdated weapon systems. They were arranged in a sphere around Earth, clearly trying to protect their homeworld from the coming attack. "Open a communication channel," the Admiral ordered. "Let's see if these humans have learned wisdom since our last conversation." The image of Director Walsh appeared on the screen again, and he looked even more frightened than before. Behind him, the primitive command center seemed to be in chaos, with officers running back and forth and alarms sounding in the background. "Admiral?" "Please," Walsh said, his voice breaking with emotion. "We've prepared the surrender documents you requested. Our government is ready to submit to Dominion authority. There's no need for violence." Zethkar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Surrender is acceptable, but first you must prove your submission. Order your fleet to power down all weapons and shields immediately." Of course," Walsh replied quickly. "But Admiral, before we do that, I have something that might interest you." "We found something that I think you've been looking for." The Admiral raised one scaled eyebrow. "Explain." Walsh seemed to gather his courage before speaking. "We found ruins, Admiral. Ancient ruins left by the original humans who lived here before our ancestors arrived. Battlefields, ship graveyards, databases full of information about their wars and their technology. We thought you might want to study them before you destroy everything." For the first time since arriving in the system, Zethkar felt a spark of real interest. Archaeological evidence of the legendary humans would be worth more than a simple conquest. If he could prove that he had solved the mystery of humanity's fate, his name would be remembered in Dominion history forever. "Show me," he demanded. Walsh transmitted coordinates for several locations throughout the system. Ancient battlefield sites, derelict shipyards, abandoned research stations. The data looked authentic, with the kind of decay and damage that came from centuries of neglect. "Commander Valthus, deploy science vessels to investigate these sites," Zethkar ordered. "I want full archaeological surveys completed before we begin the occupation." As the Dominion science ships moved toward the coordinates Walsh had provided, Colonel Ryan Mitchell allowed himself a small smile. The enemy was doing exactly what humanity had predicted they would do. Arrogance and curiosity were leading them into the carefully prepared trap. The archaeological sites were real enough. Human engineers had spent decades creating fake ruins that would pass any scientific examination. Ancient ship hulks had been artificially aged and scattered across the system. Historical databases had been filled with carefully crafted information about humanity's supposed rise and fall. Every detail had been designed to convince the Dominion that they were looking at the remnants of a dead civilization. What the science ships didn't detect were the microscopic machines hidden inside every artifact, programmed to infiltrate Dominion computer systems. They couldn't see the quantum charges embedded in the fake ruins, waiting for the right signal to activate. And they had no idea that every piece of evidence they were studying had been created less than a week ago, on the bridge of the UES Defiance. Captain Jake Morrison watched the enemy fleet through sensors that revealed far more than the Dominion suspected. His ship had dropped its disguise now, revealing sleek armor plating and weapon systems that seemed to bend light around them. Around him, 49 other vessels had done the same, transforming from primitive-looking patrol boats into ships that incorporated technology the galaxy had never seen. "Enemy science vessels have reached the bait sites," reported Commander Lisa Park from the tactical station. "All quantum charges are in position and ready for activation." Jake nodded and opened a communication channel to the hidden fleet. Throughout Human space ships that had been drifting dark and silent for decades were powering up their engines and weapons. On secret bases carved into asteroids, defensive platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment were revealing their true nature. And on 100 different worlds throughout Dominion territory, human agents were activating equipment that had been smuggled into position over the course of generations. "All ships, this is Morrison," he announced. "Execute Lazarus Protocol. Show them who we really are." The change happened in an instant. The human fleet around Earth suddenly blazed with energy as adaptive armor systems activated and weapons that violated known physics powered up. Ships that had looked like they might fall apart at any moment now moved with impossible grace and speed. The sphere formation dissolved and reformed into attack patterns that seemed to predict exactly what the Dominion fleet would do next. Admiral Zethkar watched in horror as his science vessels exploded one by one, destroyed by the quantum charges hidden in the fake archaeological sites. His sensors screamed warnings as human ships that had been reading as primitive cargo haulers suddenly displayed power signatures that made no sense. "Impossible," he whispered as energy readings climbed beyond anything his instruments could measure. "The humans are supposed to be primitive. They're supposed to be weak." The communication channel opened again, but this time the face that appeared was not the frightened Director Walsh. Instead, a calm human in a military uniform looked back at him with steady, determined eyes. "Admiral Zethkar of the Dominion Fleet," the human said. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Navy for 300 years. Your empire has conquered and enslaved the free peoples of this galaxy. Today that ends." Around the Dominion fleet, space itself seemed to come alive as human ships materialized from hyperspace. They appeared from directions that should have been impossible, using technology that allowed them to jump directly into battle formation. Weapons that had been theoretical concepts in Dominion research labs were now firing at his ships with devastating effect. "How?" Zethkar demanded. "How is this possible?" Morrison's expression never changed. "We've been watching you, Admiral. For 200 years, we've studied every battle you fought, analyzed every tactic you've used, cataloged every weakness in your ships and your strategy. We know you better than you know yourselves. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was a demonstration of what happened when an empire that had grown fat and lazy on easy conquests met an enemy that had spent centuries preparing for this exact moment. Human ships danced between Dominion formations like they could read the enemy's minds. Their weapons struck with surgical precision, disabling rather than destroying when possible. And throughout it all, they broadcast signals on frequencies the Dominion had never encountered, signals that seemed to target something other than their ships. Those signals were reaching the neural implants that every enslaved species in the Dominion fleet carried. The implants were designed to suppress independent thought and ensure loyalty to the Empire. But human scientists had spent decades studying captured implants, learning how they worked and how they might be defeated. The signals carried a very simple message repeated in dozens of languages. "You are free. Choose your own path." And across the Dominion fleet, beings who had served the Empire for generations began to remember who they had been before conquest. The revolt began slowly at first, then spread like wildfire through the Dominion fleet. On ship after ship, enslaved crew members began to remember their own names, their own cultures, their own reasons for fighting. The neural implants that had controlled their minds for generations suddenly seemed powerless against the strange signals. The human fleet was broadcasting. Lieutenant Kexthal of the Villani species was the first to act aboard the Dominion destroyer. Crushing blade, for 30 years he had served the Empire without question, his thoughts controlled by the metal device attached to his skull. But now, as the human signals washed over his mind, he remembered his homeworld before the conquest. He remembered his family, his friends, his people's proud tradition of resistance. His hands moved to the weapon controls without conscious thought. Instead of firing at the human fleet, he turned the ship's guns on the Dominion command vessel next to him. The surprise attack crippled the larger ship's engines and left it drifting helplessly in space across the fleet. Similar scenes played out on dozens of ships. The Zephyrian gunner who sabotaged his own weapon systems rather than fire on the humans. The Karathi engineer who overloaded her ship's power core, forcing an evacuation. The Thraxian communications officer who began broadcasting the locations of Dominion command ships to the human fleet. Admiral Zethkar watched his carefully organized formation fall apart as his own crews turned against him. "What is happening?" he demanded of his bridge crew. "Why are our people attacking each other?" Commander Valthus, still loyal thanks to a newer model of neural implant, checked his instruments with growing panic. "Sir, the human signals seem to be affecting our crew members with older implant models. They're breaking free of the control systems." On the main viewing screen, Zethkar could see human ships moving through his fleet with impossible precision. They seemed to know exactly which vessels were still under Dominion control and which had been liberated by their own crews. Instead of destroying the rebellious ships, the humans were offering them protection, forming defensive screens around vessels that had joined the revolt. The flagship Inevitable Conquest shuddered as energy beams struck its shields. Zethkar turned to see that the attack had come from 3 of his own escort vessels, their crews now flying the colors of their original species instead of the Dominion banner. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet," the communications officer announced. Captain Morrison's face appeared on the screen again, but now he stood on a bridge that looked nothing like the primitive command center they had seen before. Behind him, humans and aliens worked together at control stations that seemed to blend technology from dozens of different species. "Admiral, I'm offering you and your remaining loyal crew the chance to surrender," Morrison said. "Your fleet is defeated and your empire's control over these people is broken. You can end this with honor, or you can watch more of your ships destroyed by the very people you enslaved." Zethkar's pride demanded that he refuse, but his tactical training told him the battle was already lost. Nearly half his fleet had either been destroyed or captured by their own crews. The remaining ships were scattered and disorganized, facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Never," he snarled. "The Dominion does not surrender to primitives and rebels." Morrison's expression showed no anger, only sadness. "Then you've chosen to sacrifice your people for your pride." The human captain gave a signal, and the coordinated attack that followed demonstrated just how outmatched the Dominion forces really were. Human ships struck with weapons that seemed to phase through shields and armor, disabling engines and weapon systems without destroying the vessels themselves. They wanted prisoners, not corpses, and they had the technology to make that. CHOICE Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored the battle from her hidden laboratory, watching as decades of preparation finally paid off. The quantum entanglement communicators her team had developed allowed the human fleet to coordinate their attacks with impossible precision. The adaptive armor systems could reconfigure themselves in real time to counter any weapon the Dominion used, and the neural liberation signals had proven even more effective than they had hoped. "Jake, we're detecting quantum communication bursts from several of the surviving Dominion ships," she reported through the command link. "They're trying to contact their home base." On the bridge of the Liberation, Morrison felt his moment of victory turn cold. He had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "How many got through?" "At least 3 ships managed to send complete battle reports before we could jam their transmissions," Elena replied. "The Dominion High Command will know everything, our technology, our tactics, our location." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with renewed determination. "How long do we have?" "Based on previous Dominion responses to major revolts, I estimate 6 months before they deploy a full extermination fleet," Elena said. "Maybe less if they consider us a significant threat." Around the Sol system, the last of the Dominion ships either surrendered or were disabled by the combined human and rebel forces. Thousands of liberated beings found themselves free for the first time in generations. their neural implants disabled by human technology that had been specifically designed for this purpose. But the victory came with a terrible price. Humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy, ending 2 centuries of careful secrecy. Worse, they had shown the Dominion exactly what they were capable of. Ensuring that the Empire's response would be swift and overwhelming, Captain Morrison opened a communication channel to all the liberated ships that now filled human space. The faces that looked back at him represented dozens of species, each one bearing the scars of Dominion conquest, but now filled with hope for the first time in generations. "To all free beings," he announced, "today we struck the first blow against an empire that has ruled through fear and oppression for centuries. But this is only the beginning. The Dominion will not accept this defeat quietly. They will come at us with everything they have, determined to destroy not just humanity, but every species that dared to stand with us." A Villani captain whose ship had joined the revolt spoke up. "What do you propose we do, Captain Morrison? Our worlds are still under Dominion control. Our families are still enslaved." Morrison nodded gravely. "We fight. Not just for our own freedom, but for every enslaved being in this galaxy. We show them that the choice between submission and death is a false one. There is a third option: victory." The communication channel filled with voices as representatives from liberated ships pledged their support. The Zephyrians offered their expertise in advanced propulsion systems. The Korathi shared their tactical databases. The Thraxians provided intelligence about Dominion military installations. And the humans served as the organizing force that could unite these diverse species into a true coalition. As the meeting continued, Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine hope. For 2 centuries, humanity had fought a lonely war of survival, hiding in the shadows while the Dominion grew stronger. Now, for the first time, they were not alone, but he also knew that the real war was just beginning. The Dominion would not make the mistake of underestimating them again. When they returned, it would be with the full might of an empire that had conquered most of the galaxy. The question was whether the coalition of free species they had created would be strong enough to stand against the storm that was coming. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the largest fleet in galactic history emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. 5,000 ships bearing the full might of the Dominion Empire, led by Supreme Admiral Korthmas himself, the most feared military commander in the galaxy. They came not to conquer but to exterminate, carrying weapons designed to crack planets and burn entire solar systems clean of life. The Supreme Admiral stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Final Judgment, and studied the tactical displays with cold satisfaction. This time there would be no mistakes, no underestimation of the enemy. His intelligence reports had analyzed every second of the previous battle, cataloged every human weapon and tactic, and prepared countermeasures for each one. "Deploy the fleet in maximum dispersal formation," he ordered his staff. "I want sensor coverage of every cubic meter of space in this system. If the humans have any more surprises hidden, we will find them." But as the Dominion sensors swept the area, they found something unexpected. The human fleet was not hiding. Instead, nearly 1,000 ships waited in open formation near the edge of the system, their hulls gleaming with the colors and symbols of dozens of different species. This was no longer just a human resistance. It had become something much larger. Morrison stood on the bridge of the U's Liberation, humanity's new flagship, surrounded by officers from 16 different species. Commander Lisa Park, now promoted to his tactical officer, worked alongside a Villani shield specialist and a Zephyrian navigation expert. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared as a hologram next to a Korathi strategic advisor and a Thraxian intelligence analyst. "Enemy fleet is holding position at the hyperspace emergence point," reported Commander Park. "They're scanning us but not advancing. This is different from their usual tactics." Elena studied the sensor readings with interest. "They're being cautious. They learned from Zethkar's defeat, and they're not going to rush into another trap." Morrison nodded. "Then we'll have to go to them. Signal the fleet. Execute Phoenix." Rising, what happened next was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever seen. The Coalition forces didn't simply attack the Dominion fleet. They systematically dismantled it using tactics that combined the best elements of every member species. Military tradition. Human stealth ships appeared behind enemy lines, their adaptive hulls invisible to Dominion sensors. Villani vessels used their shield harmonics to turn the Empire's own weapons back on them. Zephyrian speed allowed impossible flanking maneuvers that struck before the enemy could react. And Korathi tactical computers predicted Dominion movements with frightening accuracy, but the Coalition's greatest weapon was not technology, it was unity. Every ship in the fleet fought not just for their own freedom, but for the liberation of every enslaved being in the galaxy. They had something the Dominion had never encountered before: troops who were fighting for something greater than themselves. Supreme Admiral Korthmas watched his carefully planned formation crumble as enemy forces struck from directions that should have been impossible. His ships were faster, his weapons more powerful, his fleet larger, but none of that seemed to matter against an enemy that fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. "How are they coordinating their attacks so precisely?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Our communications are being jammed, but they seem unaffected." The answer lay in technology the Dominion couldn't detect: human quantum entanglement. Communicators allowed instant coordination across the entire Coalition fleet. But more than that, the diverse species fighting together had learned to think as one, their different strengths combining into something greater than the sum of their parts. As the battle raged, something else was happening throughout Dominion space. The liberation signals that had freed the enslaved crews at Sol were now being broadcast from hidden transmitters that human agents had spent decades placing on occupied worlds. Across 1,000 planets, beings who had forgotten their own names began to remember what freedom felt like. The revolt that followed was swift and merciless. On world after world, the Dominion's control infrastructure collapsed as their own subjects turned against them. Space stations that had enforced imperial rule for centuries found themselves surrounded by rebel fleets. Planetary governors who had ruled through fear discovered that fear could work both ways. On the bridge of the final judgment, Korthmas received report after report of uprisings throughout his empire. Systems that had been loyal for hundreds of years were declaring independence. Entire fleets were defecting to join the growing rebellion. The very foundation of Dominion power was crumbling. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition fleet," his communications officer announced with obvious reluctance. Admiral Morrison's image appeared on the main screen, but he was no longer alone. Behind him stood representatives from dozens of species, all of them looking directly at the Supreme Admiral with expressions of quiet determination. "Supreme Admiral Korthmas," Morrison said. "I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Free Coalition Navy, on behalf of every enslaved being. In this galaxy, I accept your surrender." Korthmas stared at the screen in disbelief. "Surrender? You think this rabble of primitives and rebels can defeat the Dominion Empire?" Morrison's expression never changed. "Look around you, Admiral. Your fleet is broken, your empire is in revolt, and your people are choosing freedom over fear. The war is over. The only question now is how many more lives you want to sacrifice for a cause that's already lost?" The Supreme Admiral looked at his tactical displays and saw the truth in Morrison's words. His mighty fleet was scattered and demoralized, facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate his every move. More ships were arriving to join the Coalition every hour, former Dominion vessels, whose crews had broken free of their neural implants and chosen to fight for liberation. But it was the reports from across the Empire that sealed his fate. World after world was joining the rebellion, inspired by the Coalition's victory. The Dominion's control was collapsing not because of military defeat, but because their subjects had remembered what it meant to hope. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. Morrison consulted with the representatives behind him, then turned back to the screen. "Immediate cessation of all hostilities. Removal of all neural implants from enslaved populations. Withdrawal of Dominion forces to their core worlds. and trials for those responsible for crimes against sentient beings. And if I refuse? Morrison gestured to the Coalition fleet surrounding the remnants of the Dominion force. Then we'll liberate every world in your empire one by one until there's nothing left of your rule but bad memories. The choice was not really a choice at all. Korthmas gave the order to stand down, and the Dominion's reign of terror officially ended years later. When historians tried to pinpoint the exact moment when humanity's legend became reality, they would debate the details endlessly. Some pointed to the first battle at Seoul, others to the great revolt that followed. But the survivors knew the truth. Humanity had always been real, not as conquerors or saviors, but as proof that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. They had shown the galaxy that freedom was not a gift to be granted by the powerful, but a right to be claimed by the brave. The free coalition that emerged from the war's ashes became a beacon of hope for the entire galaxy. Worlds that had suffered under Dominion rule for centuries began to rebuild according to their own values and traditions. Species that had been scattered to the winds found each other again and rekindled old friendships, and at the center of it, humanity continued to serve as the glue that held the coalition together. Not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they understood something fundamental. About the nature of freedom, it only had meaning when it was shared. The legend lived on, not in stories told around campfires, but in the free worlds that chose to stand together against any future darkness. And whenever new threats arose, beings across the galaxy would remember the lesson humanity had taught them. Some legends they learned were too important to remain myths.